I'm now joined by Rear Admiral Sinclair Harris, who's retired from the military after a 34-year career in the U.S. Navy. He served as Vice Director of Operations to the Chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and as Commander of the U.S. Fourth Fleet. Today, he continues to serve in numerous leadership and advisory roles, including National Vice President of the Navy League of the United States. Rear Admiral Harris, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let me ask you, to give us your strategic map as you look at America's military readiness for the threats it faces. Where does amphibious expeditionary warfare capacity fit in that?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Steve. Pleasure being here. And people may think that I'm biased because I spent about a third of my seagoing career on amphibious warships of different types and sizes. But I've spent time on many different platforms and 6 tours in the Pentagon. I would have to say that expeditionary warfare, amphibious warfare, what comes with the Navy Marine Corps team spans 85 to 90% of the competition space that we have. And that goes from low-end humanitarian operations all the way up to major combat operations. It is the number one, and I would bet a dinner on this. It was the number one highest return on investment for our dollars in terms of our ships and platforms.
Well, as you look today, and I think around the world, we've been talking a lot about the Indo-Pacific region. I think today about, Iran and its neighborhood. I think about other dimensions out there and the projection of force and all the elements that comes with that. How did we underinvest these last couple of decades? And I know it's so important, but for something so important right now, I think one of the reasons why this program is going on today, there's as Joe Courtney said, he looks at this whole supply chain, he looks at this industry as one that's fragile.
Well, the budget, as Mr. Courtney eloquently stated, is always under pressure. There's always challenges, and each service is working as best they can to fit whatever the strategic narrative is for the time. Expeditionary warfare allowed some of our ships to get older. It wasn't by intent. It was purely by the budget priorities of the time. But it's clear, and you can look at any number of strategic reports. You can read the paper anytime and see the call for big deck amphibious warfare platforms and even smaller decks has continued to be high by the combatant commanders across a range of operations. And with the oncoming of the light amphibious warfare warship, that is going to address the challenges we see coming forward, especially in the Indo-Pacific and other places.
I'm going to have General Berger on in just a little bit, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and one of the things I'm looking forward to talking to him about is the humanitarian dimensions of a lot of these ships. And I'm just sort of, you've seen a lot of crises around the world when you were operating at this vast system and the Fourth Fleet. A lot of this capacity, can you tell us a little bit about how some of this capacity has really helped in times of incredible global need?
Well, I can go back to the time when we deployed for Katrina and Rita, and I was the commander of Amphibious Squadron 4. And we brought the Iwo Jima and 3 other amphibious warships up the Mississippi River, and they provided direct support during that crisis, and then stayed around for Rita. We can go into the evacuation of almost 15,000 Americans from Lebanon during that crisis. And that was done by amphibious warships and a few others that were there to augment. In one day of operation, I recall being in Fifth Fleet in the Middle East, we had a large deck that was supporting humanitarian operations in Pakistan, where I had disembarked and was working with the rest of the Joint Force there. We were also flying missions up the boulevard into Afghanistan. And at the same time, we had another amphibious warship, part of the same group, that was doing counter-piracy.
It's a fascinating array of tasks to be out there. One of the other dimensions that I was just discussing with the congressman was this question of whether or not we need to build new sort of medium-sized amphibious platforms, or whether it makes more sense to continue to modernize those ships we have now, because I know there's been some curtailment, as I understand, the L-class, some of these L-class platforms. Where would you go? What would be, given what you know about how much time is involved with product development, are we underinvesting in the modernization of the ships we have now?
I don't want to say that we're underinvesting in the modernization. I think that there have been a lot of difficult choices that have to be made inside the Pentagon, inside Capitol Hill, to invest in the correct capabilities. I think that the investment in newer platforms, smaller platforms such as the LAW, is critically important when we look at not just today, but the future and how we're going to do distributed operations, distributed maritime operations, if you will, into the future. It's going to be important to have these smaller platforms with smaller units that can operate. And quite frankly, they're going to operate both with Marines and probably Special Forces. Special Forces love amphibious warfare platforms.
Admiral, one of the things that came up when my team was talking to you was a discussion of gray zone operations. Sounds intriguing to me, from competitive nations. How does expeditionary amphibious platforms fit into this question of gray zone operations from our competitors?
Well, quite frankly, the expeditionary warfare platforms, amphibious warfare ships, own the gray zone. They're the ones who are fighting, as one former commandant would talk about, the 4-block war, where they're feeding babies on one and they're going after bad guys on another and doing things in between. So you'll find multitask that happen in the gray zone, going after terrorists, doing the training for our partners. That is critically important in stabilizing areas and ensuring that American interests continue to be well represented and supported and defended by working with our partners. So the gray zone, quite frankly, and I mentioned counter-piracy earlier,
sure.
And humanitarian operations, the amphibious warfare owns the gray zone.
Well, Rear Admiral Sinclair Harris, former Vice Director Operations of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you have an open door here. I loved, learning what I have learned so far, but there's so much more I could learn from you if we spent more time together. So I hope you'll come back. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Anytime. Thank you very much.